In this video, I am going to look at a game I played last Tuesday in the McArthur Cup for Horsham against Brighton. The match was played at Horsham. I was on board 3. I had the black pieces and was up against Brian Denman. Brian is a very strong player, but he hasn't played competitive chess for a number of years, at least not until this season. He seemed unfamiliar with the current playing conditions, which proved relevant later in the game. He started with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, the Ruy Lopez. a6, bishop a4, knight f6, castles, d6. This is an unusual move order for reaching the Steinitz deferred. Black avoids some of White's more direct tries, forcing him to adopt a more classical approach based on building a pawn centre. This allows Black, at least in the main lines, to safely aim for a kingside fianchetto. Rook e1, bishop d7. Black needs to prepare g6 with this move, as g6 at once is inaccurate because of bishop takes c6 check, b takes c6, d4. After bishop d7, play went c3, g6, d4, bishop g7, knight on b to d2, castles, h3. This is useful as White prevents Black generating counterplay with bishop g4, which looks to build pressure on the d4 pawn. Now, in this position, Black's most common move is rook e8, which looks to generate pressure down the e-file. Second most common is e takes d4, looking for active play. Black chose queen e8, which is the third most common move, and one which sets a sneaky trap. The idea is that Black threatens knight takes d4 when bishop takes d7 would be met by the intermezzo knight takes f3 check before recapturing on d7. This would win Black a pawn. Now, White was naturally wise to this and decided to retreat his bishop to c2 with bishop c2. Now, Black was unsure exactly how to follow up now and decided to play a couple of standard moves in this position which prepare f5, knight h5, knight f1, king h8. And now knight g3 was worth considering, but knight e3, as chosen by White, intending to bring the knight to d5 while also eyeing the f5 square, is very sensible. Now, Black should have played f5 in any case, which was after all the move that he was preparing. Then knight e5 can be met by rook c8. However, he chose e takes d4 with some vague ideas of creating counterplay, but after c takes d4, these weren't really there. He followed up with knight b4, which is the typical follow-up to e takes d4, but it fails to achieve anything of value, as after bishop b1, Black doesn't have a convincing follow-up. c5 was the move Black wanted to play, but White had more than one good response. d5 is straightforward and good, while knight c4 was the move that actually caused Black to reject c5, because White's pressure on the d6 pawn is rather awkward. As a result, Black chose the rather more passive a5, and play went a3, knight a6, knight d5, Now black decided that he needed to cover c7 in preparation for trying to drive the knight on d5 back. So he played queen d8, but now white can play the disruptive bishop g5, which really forces black to play f6, which is really not a move that he wants to play, as now the knight on h5 risks being trapped by g4. Play went bishop e3, c6, knight c3. Now, black couldn't see anything better than f5. He felt compelled to play this to prevent g4, but he now faces different problems with the many weaknesses in his position. Play went e takes f5, g takes f5. Now black has a weak f-pawn, knight g5, hitting the knight on h5 and also eyeing the e6 square. Knight f6, bishop f4, hitting the weak d-pawn, h6. Black could see nothing better than forcing matters in this way, trying to restrict his losses. Knight e6, bishop takes e6, rook takes e6, knight e4, knight takes e4, f takes e4, bishop takes h6. So white has now won a pawn, and black's position is starting to become desperate. Queen h4. Black seeks counterplay. His only real hope is that white's development is slightly behind his, because he still hasn't brought his rook on a1 into the game. However, this shouldn't really matter. Now, white continue queen d2, which looks very strong. He could have played bishop takes g7 check, king takes g7, queen g4 check, queen takes g4, h takes g4. But after d5, black's position holds out more hope than it did in the game. Anyway, after queen d2, play went rook f6, bishop takes g7 check, king takes g7, rook takes e4. White wins another pawn, queen h5, rook g4 check, king f8, bishop d3, rook e8. Black is desperately looking for counterplay, but white easily counters his efforts. Rook e1, rook takes e1 check, queen takes e1, knight c7, queen d2, knight d5. Now, black was gambling on white not wanting to move his queen offside by playing queen takes a5, but actually looking at this position in the cold light of day, black has no real response to this, and this would have been clearly winning for white. However, his more cautious choice, bishop c4, is also very good. He is, after all, 2 pawns up, and so doesn't really need to take any risks. Black went b5, bishop takes d5, queen takes d5, and again white could have grabbed the a pawn. Maybe at this point it was more clearly a good choice, as this would have deprived black of any chances of trying to create counterplay. As it happened, though, he decided to play rook f4, which is perfectly sensible, and after rook takes f4, queen takes f4 check, play had gone into a queen and pawn endgame. Now, obviously, white really ought to win this endgame, but black does have a majority of pawns on the queen side, and white's king is over on the king side. So as both players were starting to run rather short of time and getting to that stage in the game when both were playing on not a lot more than the increment, black did at least have some practical chances here. So play went king e7, queen e3 check, king d7, queen d3 check, king c7, queen c3, king b6. Now, at this point, there was a rather surprising turn of events. White now allowed his time to run out in the mistaken belief that he had reached a time control when he would receive more time. In fact, we were playing the standard Sussex League time control of 65 minutes plus 30-second increment, with no time control, but a potential adjournment and adjudication at the end of the 3-hour, 10-minute playing session. Now, both players would have needed to have played at least 60 moves to have reached that point, and as we were move 42, there was a way to go yet. So what I was planning after king b6 was to meet b4 with a4, and there were some potential tricks based on playing the queen to b3, although white ought to be able to negotiate these. Anyway, all of this was academic as my opponent allowed his time to run out, and so I claimed the win, which proved very valuable to the team in securing overall match victory.